Daffys are out and snowdrops and things like that.
Yeah, that's what I meant. Well, we've got the daffodils have come out now, and some tulips are coming up. Not in my garden, but in other people around us have got the and that's when I know it's a sign of spring. I've got freesia all across my backyard's all up.
Oh, lovely.
That's nice.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, it's sunny, but it's not overly warm.
No.
Right? I mean, it's
It's only about 10 centigrade here.
yeah.
Eric, it's supposed to be 72 degrees by
Yeah,
Wednesday.
today.
No. Well, it's supposed to. This coming weekend is supposed to be 75, but yeah, but you know, Wednesday's going to be warm, but Thursday's going to be dropping another 10 degrees.
That's the day he plays golf.
That's the day I play golf. That's a
why
very
he knows
important
about
day.
Thursday.
That's not so good.
Good morning, Joe.
Good morning, guys.
Sun's supposed to shine in the
Morning, Joe.
righteous, you know.
Good morning, Linda. I don't know where Mark is, but we don't ever see you, but good morning.
Oh, okay.
I don't see Joe. Oh, there's Joe, yeah.
Oh, there he is. Hi,
Joe,
Joe.
when are you going to do your trip?
I just got back from Arizona, so I'm working on it. But I would say the end of, I was looking at the update of coming presentations, and so I should be ready by towards the end of April, I guess.
Well, I'm looking forward to seeing your pictures too.
Okay.
Which one are you thinking and doing, Joe?
Well, I don't know. Maybe Iceland, Greenland. I also have the safari one.
Yeah, that's the one I want to see, the safari one.
Okay, I'll do that one first then.
Good.
It's just that one has, I probably have 1,000 pictures on that one. It's just incredible.
Yeah.
So I gotta go through them and pick the best ones.
Well, we could do a 5-hour one.
Pardon me?
The only problem with a 5-hour, we need lots of alcohol.
Yeah, well, not only that, the time differences makes it'd be on to 1 o'clock in the morning in the UK.
So
Is my picture, does it all look all pixelated on Zoom?
no, it looks good.
Okay, but as I'm looking at it, it just seems like there's 200 vertical divisions in it. It's hard to see.
No, you look fine on this end, so your camera's working.
Okay.
Maybe your monitor or something.
I zoomed in on you. I can read the books behind you. All the titles of all the books behind you are perfectly clear. So you're sharp as a bell.
Okay, yeah, those are all Pulp Fiction junk. So
Because
Okay, being that it's 2 minutes past the witching hour, we're now going to start. So the presentation today is going to be a trip that I did a couple of years ago with some friends, Gary and Karen, and we ended up doing a driving trip, rented a car and drove from Berlin down towards Dresden, Prague, into the Alps, and then made a turn into Stuttgart and back to Frankfurt. So it was just a really nice driving trip. So as we go, here is a little bit of an overview to start out with of Berlin, because a lot of people don't understand that Berlin has a huge amount of water around it. You can see I put a red circle in the middle, and this is going to be primarily the center area of Berlin, where I'm going to show you pictures of some of the buildings. The big rivers that go through here are the Spree River, and it's as you can see, it cuts right through the middle of Berlin. One of the interesting things also is that so much of Berlin's history and everything around it, World War II obviously has a lot to do with it. So I added a slide to give you a little bit of an overview what ended up happening at the end of the war. And this is about 1945, when the Russians came in and you can see as I start to go, you'll see different pictures of different things, but it gives you a little bit of a feel on the Russian front as it went into Berlin, what happened. You can see the Polish, the German forces who were trying to hold out, the Soviets who were coming in and circling Berlin. And anyway, a little bit of a historical context there.
Looks like from all the arrows, there were a lot of Russians coming in.
Well, you know, the deal obviously was that the Americans and everybody made the deal that says, okay, you're going to come this way, you're going to come this way. And so the Russians, it was the Russian push into Berlin. So yes, the Russians were out, undoubtedly, they were the biggest influence there. So as these pictures start to come, and this is another, not a war context, but farther back, this is what's called Old Berlin or Alte Berlin, that centerpiece. And Berlin originally in the 1600s had a wall around it. And each one, as the wall was around, had doors. And if you notice on the lettering THOR, well, that basically is German for door. So you see the Frankfurter door, the Landsberger door, and then you have all the doors into the city at the time. So you'll see that as we go along. But the old city is the center where the river went through. Let me go back real quick. Where we're going to start today is on the red star. That is the Frankfurter Bahnhof, which is the train station. And this is where, after we rented our car and put our car away, you really don't want to drive around Berlin, because it's far easier to get around with their trains. So we started the trip at the train station, and this is the current Berlin train station, which is, you know, super modern, super nice, but obviously it didn't survive the war, the original one. This is the inside of the train station. You can see everything is just super clean and efficient. In a typical German fashion, if the train comes at 11:43 and it says it's going to leave at 11:47, it's going to leave at 11:47. It doesn't leave at 11:50. So it's, you know, it's like clockwork on the thing. So as we're walking around and going around in downtown Berlin, here's one of the first National Museum of Art that was originally built in 1876. These buildings are just off the Richter scale beautiful, and the insides, each building you can spend a day in them.
Yeah.
This is what they call the Old Museum in Berlin. It's a very large museum. Again, you can easily spend a day inside of it, but the building was originally completed in 1830. Obviously got hurt during the war, but they didn't get taken to the ground. So they've really put it back into excellent shape. Here we have what's called the Bode Museum, which was originally called the Kaiser Friedrich Museum, and it was built in 1898. It's on the River Spree, so as you go through Berlin, but you can start to see a little bit of the modern pieces of Berlin poking out, because this tower on your left is the television tower in Berlin. So it's a real interesting balance between the two of them. I put a picture in here. This was before the war of that same building. And one of the things, if you note on there, that there was Kaiser Wilhelm on his horse, but probably because he had slaves or some reason, I don't know why. But anyway, the man on the horse, if you look at the current view, is gone, but the building itself is still there. It's just a spectacularly beautiful building on the River Spree, and it's going through the middle of Berlin. Here we have the what's called the Reichstag, which is the building used for the center of German politics, and it was originally built in 1871. This is a current picture of what it looks like. Obviously, the glass dome was not built in 1871 because this was built back together. But this was originally also Hitler's main power center. Here's what the building looked like after the war. And you can see the amount of devastation to the building, but they were able to put the building back together. And because if you look at that in June of 1845, and then you look at this, this picture, it's the context of the building is still there, but so much of it was blown apart. What it says up at the top of the building was "the German people" is what the title of the building was. So as we ended up getting on a small boat, because it's the only way to really see Berlin to start out with to get a good flavor, you can see the buildings were built literally into the river. So this is part of the government building on the backside. Another one of these unbelievable buildings. This one here is the British Cathedral. It's a Protestant church built in 1894. You can see in front there I am standing there with my friend Karen and her husband Gary, who is back in the background right now. But again, you can go inside these buildings, and it's spending a half a day is just, it doesn't do it justice. I mean, I'm just skimming over the top right now. This is again the cathedral, but from a distance you can see the Spree River that goes through the middle of Berlin, right next to it. One of the things, that building that you see there is the modern version of something that they tried in the 1950s after the war. They didn't want this old structures anymore. They wanted modern and new. And so right next to this spectacularly beautiful building, they build this god-awful piece of crap that is 1950s architecture that they thought was beautiful at the time. And it's just the difference between the time periods. As on the Spree River, there is I saw this emblem, which I really enjoyed, and it was just 1688, because Berlin goes way back into the 12th and 13th century. It was just a beautiful little piece of metalwork. One of the things, metalwork around Berlin is just, again, off the Richter scale. This is the State Opera House, and it was built in 1742. But one of the things, again, you're going to see over and over is this metalwork. I mean, it's so beautiful, and but it's also very functional, because you can see nobody wants to put their foot anywhere on this. But at the same time, you still get to see the beautiful building behind it. So here is an original kind of a drawing of the building. This goes back to 1745. So that's more or less what the building looked like. And that is just the side of the building, of the same building. So we go on. This is, we ended up renting an Airbnb in Berlin. We were there for like 5 days in a town called Charlottenburg. And this palace is in Charlottenburg. And Charlottenburg is, if you remember at the very beginning, I showed you a couple of doors. There is a Charlottenburg door out of Berlin. And this was I can't remember who the person was, but in 1699, they built this palace in Charlottenburg. Luckily, because it was on the outskirts, it didn't get bombed as badly. This is another palace, because Berlin's full of these unbelievable buildings. This is the Bellevue Palace. It was erected in 1796, and it was a summer residence. And it's now the official residence of the president of Germany. So this is where Angela Merkel basically lives, or whoever the next chancellor will be. But it's called the Bellevue Palace. So on the things we have to do is eat. So typical in Berlin is these great little places to eat, very cozy, very, very nice. And here I am with my friend Gary and Karen sitting there having this great little lunch. As we're going on another tour around the waterway, we get on this boat. And one of the things I realized on this boat you're going to start to see is that the man in the back who's driving, if you'll notice, he goes up and down because the bridges, many of them were built, 17th, 18th century. And they weren't designed for big boats to go underneath them. So they have designed these boats so that when you get close to a bridge, the guy who's driving, he starts to go down and you'll see it go up and down as we go. So as we're going down the Spree River, was a lock that we went into, just an interesting lock, because being a boater, I like this kind of stuff. In Berlin on the Spree River, like the Thames in England and most of the rivers in Europe, lots of people live on them. And so here you can see that you can actually take your boat from the down the Spree River and down the different rivers. And if you want to just tie onto the wall, this is kind of something I have planned if COVID ever releases us, because you can literally go from Amsterdam to Berlin or Amsterdam to Marseille to Germany, all by water. And every city allows you to tie to the walls. So here's just an example in Berlin of some people who tied to the walls of the sea. So as we go through these little communities, you'll see the bridges, and almost all of the bridges that you're going to see were almost all destroyed by the Germans, because what they were trying to do during the war was to stop the advance of the Russians into Berlin. And if you remember, one of the very first pictures I showed you was all the water around Berlin. So as these bridges would be blown up to stop the advance, this has now been rebuilt, obviously. Just a beautiful bridge, but you can see how low it is because they built it back to its original size. And the boat that we were going on, you can see that guy having to lower himself down to be able to get underneath this bridge. Just another bridge, just something I enjoy. I love the metal work that they've done because it's just second to none. Here we have another bridge, but it's again a metal bridge with the borders around it are obviously all out of metal. This is more current style. The Europeans or the Germans especially don't really necessarily, I don't know why, make things as beautiful as they used to be. Everything is now modern. So modern, here's a modern building in Berlin, right? I mean, you look at it and you go, well, 100 years from now, will they say that that's beautiful? Probably not. But that's the current architecture. I mean, here's the current architecture. Everything has to be glass and modern and stark and cold, but big differences. But this is, as you go around Berlin, you start to see the two differences. Here we have a hotel. Again, even 20 years from now, will they say that's beautiful? Probably not. So as we're going up the river, these are just little eating areas, and you can see that they're redoing all of the walls on the Spree River because some of these walls are very old. So they use these metal staples. An old building that obviously must have gotten bombed, but at the same time on either side, they have built the new stuff. And so you can see the beauty of the old, and you can see the utilitarian pieces on the right and the left. This is a part of Berlin which I found very interesting, was the Bohemian or where the young kids have taken over. It's now becoming like every other town that has the young people go into these little dumpy areas. But this was an interesting area where an old factory where these young kids congregate and they do what they do. Again, just a combination of somebody has built an old building and they're adding this new thing onto it onto the side. So they're trying to blend new and old here. This is one of the few places still left in Berlin where you can actually see the original wall. That is a short piece of the Berlin Wall still standing. Here we have another bridge that did get bombed through the war, and it was a double-deck bridge crossing the Spree River, and it was originally built in 1732. The top is the top is railroad, and this is a picture I obviously took off the internet, but it's the same bridge. And this picture was made in 1900s, and it shows the rail up high and the city rail down below also, but the people traffic moving back and forth. One of our rooms we stayed in, it just a typical German room with feather beds and very comfortable. You obviously saw this on the internet, but this was inside of our room. They're very whimsical art because this was on our wall. And my wife being a quilter and a person who likes to do cloth, she enjoyed this because somebody put a lot of effort into doing this piece of artwork, and it was on the wall, but it was very interesting. Here we are now at the Brandenburg Gate, which is again another one of those THOR doors that went outside of Berlin. And the Brandenburg Gate here was built in 1788, and it was used by Napoleon, out of all people, in 1806 for a victory that he had. So he went there and used the Brandenburg Gate as a background. If you notice on top of the Brandenburg Gate, there is what's called the quadriga. And what the quadriga is, you'll see it again in a second, but just as a notation of where it originally was. Here's a picture I took off the internet. This was the Brandenburg Gate in 1930, before the war. You could see, you can see the more or less the door of the wall that was originally surrounding Berlin. So the quadriga, which is on top of the Brandenburg Gate, is a chariot drawn by 4 horses, and it was originally, anyway, it's been around for a long time. In April of 1945 is when the U.S. Army came in, and this is what the Brandenburg Gate looked like. You can see the quadriga still on top, but you can see the amount of devastation around it, the buildings. I mean, it's amazing what they've been able to do is to put it back into shape, because you look at that and now you look at 1930 before. It's just very unfortunate how much history got lost. So here we are at the Reichstag. This is again the center of power of Germany right now, and you can see the glass dome in the background on top of the Reichstag. And one of the things to note here is that there is the little bricks that go down right there. You can see it on the road. What that was where the Berlin Wall was. Okay, so when they built the Berlin Wall, the Germans have made it. They obviously took most of the wall down, but they've made this pathway so you can follow it around if you want to see where the wall actually was. And you can see how the Reichstag, which is the center of power, was left on the Russian side, but the American side had the rest of it. But that series of stones was where the wall was. So in 1978 is when the wall went down, and this was the picture I found it very interesting, is the Reichstag with the quadriga. You can still see it up top, but you can see how close the wall was to the Brandenburg Gate. Again, here is the Reichstag, and this was a picture of that time period with the wall up, and you can see the young kids standing on top of the wall just before it came down. The Americans were obviously on the inside, and then the left of it is the actual building, which is now the center of power still of Germany. Another interesting thing, right near the Brandenburg Gate, you have a Jewish memorial, and it was a memorial to the murdered Jews of Europe, and it's really an amazing memorial, and it has almost no writings to it, other than it's just to show the immensity of what the Germans did, and it's right next to the Brandenburg Gate, so it's one of those things that you want to go see, and but the feeling is just it's hard to believe. My friend Gary, who we walked around there, again, they put no names or anything on it, but it's just the size of each one of these concrete blocks. So here we are now with another site. This was the original sign when you would go at Checkpoint Charlie from the different Berlins, from what's called West Berlin to East Berlin, and you wanted to go into the Russian area. And it says, you're entering the American sector, carrying weapons off duty is forbidden, and you obey the traffic rules. So in about 1980, early 80s, I was there and saw the wall, saw the Checkpoint Charlie, the original one. And so I hadn't really been back to Checkpoint Charlie, but here's Checkpoint Charlie nowadays. What we have is Checkpoint Charlie and McDonald's. And so you can see McDonald's on the right-hand side, but it's basically a tourist attraction. But it's hard for people to believe how crazy it was. I mean, I've got pictures of the craziness, but they're all printed pictures or slides from that time period. I was going to try to contrast it, but it's just interesting. It's now nothing. Checkpoint Charlie, that's the original one, is nothing more than a tourist attraction. And so they have a couple of people standing out there. You can take pictures of yourself with an American soldier or however you want, and then you got to pay them. Here's Checkpoint Charlie in 1961. And so what you have here is Soviet tanks on the far side and American tanks on this side. So that's how, in a very short period of time in most of our lives, how this has changed. I mean, it's staggering. So here's a small piece of the wall still left over. And again, the Germans have done it in a whimsical way, put it next to an ATM. So, trying to remember that you can now get money, but in those days, there was no freedom. One of the other very interesting things is this is what's called the Berlin Victory Column. It was built in 1864. It was to commemorate the Prussian victory over Denmark. And it was originally right in front of the Reichstag, which is the center of power at that time in Germany. But Hitler decided to move the Berlin Victory Column away. And so you can start to now see the Victory Column is where I am taking the picture down this road. And in the background there, you can see what's called the Brandenburg Gate again. So he moved that Victory Column from the Reichstag all the way out to this area. And but he totally rebuilt the area, rebuilt the roads, made them wide. And the Victory Column now, to get to it, you have 4 entrances that you can walk underneath. So they made it very accessible to the public at that time. And the designer of the Victory Column was Albert Speer. So here's an original picture of the victory column, because when it was originally in Berlin, it was down at the Reichstag, which is the center of power at that time. And so you can see how they did it, how they moved it. I couldn't find any information out of it. It was just interesting to move such an immense structure from one place to another. So here I am standing in the victory column inside, and you're going to see a lot of holes and chinkers out of this. And so much of the victory column was being used for target practice by the Russians, and Germans would hide behind it and they tried to shoot them. And so they've left all of these holes on the victory column all over it. You'll see up at the top of this, you can see the little chinkers out of it. And those are all shots being taken at the victory column. But it's just an immensely beautiful structure. There it is again, just these marble stone, marble structure. And, obviously, a shot was taken at it and it takes a chinker out of it. These at the bottom of the victory column, an interesting thing, these were brass reliefs that were made. And the French originally took the metal facades off the monument because in 1945, as the war was ending, everybody was looting or trying to get what they could as the war was ending. And so the French ended up taking a lot of these metal facades, and they took them back to Paris to put them into the different museums. But in 1987, on the 750th anniversary of Berlin, the French brought most of these reliefs back. And you can see some of them have bullet holes, some of them have the heads taken off. But anyway, it's part of the victory column. So we're going to leave Berlin now. And so we ended up driving from Berlin down to a town called Dresden. So Dresden is obviously further south, and then we're going to go down to Prague. So Dresden was known as the German Florence on the Elbe. So the Elbe is the river that flows through, and it goes all the way to the North Sea. So it's a very important river in Germany, like the Rhine is. But Dresden was in the Russian section of Germany. So for the longest time, not much happened there, but lots of devastation. This red star that you see there is on the banks of the Elbe, and that's Dresden. But I put that there to show you where I'm standing. This is the Elbe River now when we were there, and it flows through the middle of the town. And so much, if you notice, is greenery on the left side banks, and on the right side, they've got concrete and everything else. Anyway, the reason is that the Elbe every 20 years or so has huge floods. And one of the floods, this was in 2003, the Elbe got so flooded that they were almost afraid that the town was going to get flooded. But anyway, it mostly stayed within the high banks. But you can see how wide the river gets. And this was 2003. Before we go into Dresden, I'm going to show you a picture of what Dresden looked like after the war. So 90% of the city was destroyed by the Americans and the English. And they figure around 22,000 people were killed. And this happened over a 3-day period. And it was about 2 months before the war ended. It was after the Americans saw what the Germans had done in the concentration camps, and the world was outraged, obviously. But they sent 800 bombers into Dresden, and they dropped 2,700 tons of explosives in 3 days onto this city. And it literally just took the city and just tore it apart, obviously. So the old structure of the city, they've rebuilt it. You're going to see it. This is the beginning of it. This was the opera house in Dresden. And it's one of the more beautiful buildings, but it obviously was just absolutely devastated during the war, at the end of the war. And it was originally built in 1841. So here's a picture that Eric took. And Eric, I'll let you speak to this. You got to turn your sound on. Sound, Eric?
Yeah.
Okay, you hear me?
Yep.
So Elf and I did a Viking river cruise in the Elbe from Berlin to Prague. And this is one of the stop-offs we spent in Dresden. And this is an actual photograph. I mean, it looks like somebody drew it or painted it, but it's an actual photograph. And as Barry says, that's the Opera House. And the rain just started when we were touring that area. And we saw just a little bit over from here, we saw people laying the cobbles. They were hand laying the cobbles further on. And anyway, I caught this lady with a red umbrella and I took a photograph. And to this day, I think it's gorgeous because I call this pixelated because it looks, I think it might have been my first digital camera. It was just a low-end camera. And I thought something had happened with the camera when I saw it, when I saw the cobblestones and then the bricks that's in the Opera House, they all blended together, and then this little lady with a red umbrella. And I love this photograph, but it is a photograph, not a drawing.
Right.
By the way, Barry, when you were talking about the bombing of Dresden,
Right.
What we had learned on that tour was that during the war, it was agreed between Britain and Germany that no cathedrals would be bombed. Well, Germany bombed Coventry Cathedral. And when Churchill knew about that, just nearer the end of the war, he decided, right, let's just go in and obliterate it.
Right, exactly.
I heard the same thing at school, Elspeth, and I was going to ask about that later. I heard that too about Churchill. Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah,
what they said there in the nomenclature around the buildings that we were walking is that the Americans bombed by day and the British bombed by night, or vice versa. I don't know which for these 3, 4, or 5 days. And one of the reasons they gave was the one Elspeth just gave you, and then the other one I read, and they weren't sure which was which, was that the Allies were bombing because the Germans wouldn't surrender, and this was in hope that they would finally just give up. Anyway, which theory? Who knows?
Well, Eric, like I said, one of the other things that you forget about is that 1945, June of 45, they were liberating the concentration camps, and the Americans were so outraged, and which I appreciate. I mean, it was just an insane thing. And so this was like, Churchill pissed off, Americans pissed off. And so for 3 days, they said, we're just going to decimate this place. And that's exactly what they did. So it's very unfortunate. But
for it to be obliterated so much, it was amazing how they built it all up again, because it was just beautiful. I love Dresden.
Yeah, Dresden was, they called it the Florence on the Elbe. I mean, everywhere you look, I mean, the buildings are unbelievable. The artwork, and I mean, it's like Berlin is great, but Dresden is amazing. It's just amazing. Mm-hmm. So here is the inside of the Opera House, right? I took this off the internet because at the time they wouldn't let us into the Opera House, but you can see the beauty of the place. I mean, it's just spectacular. So in Dresden also, there is a thing called the Zwinger, Zwinger complex, and it was built in 1709. It's one of the most beautiful places, again, that I had ever seen. And this is just the outskirts of it right now. So the river Elbe has little tributaries, and it goes around the Zwinger garden, and it was originally utilized by the royal court, and all it was for garden purposes. It really was ceremonial. So here's the inside of the Zwinger Palace. And this, like I said, it was built in 1709, and it's just the architecture and the feeling is just spectacular. Here is a picture of that same structure after the war. So if you look here, right behind my head, you can see that building with a green roof on it. That is that, right? I mean, it's how they were able to rebuild it and get it back into the original context and be able to find things. I mean, they've done such an unbelievable job at putting it back together. But it's the Zwinger Palace is just one of those phenomenal places to go see if you happen to get to Dresden. Again, on the inside of the Zwinger Palace, it's just a spectacularly beautiful place. Is all just on the inside of the palace. So Dresden by itself, this is just a picture I took off the internet, but it's again, it was a walled city in the Zwinger castle or palace was on the outskirts of the walled city. So when the Americans bombed and the British bombed Dresden, so much of the center got bombed, and the outskirts, so much of the Zwinger still stayed because of the being outside of the city walls of the original town. Here we have, again in Dresden, what are called the I could say in German, Fürstenberg painting. And it was originally a painting in 1871. But right after that, I don't know how many of the ladies are familiar with Meissen, but Meisen is some of the most expensive porcelain in the world. So if you have a Meissen plates or something, but Meissen, they ended up taking the painting, and this is an original 23,000 porcelain tiles made by Meissen in 1904, and it actually received very minimal damage after the war, during the war of when they got bombed. But it's a beautiful piece of artwork and made out of porcelain. Obviously this must have been bombed because this looks too new and everything, but it was just the inner court of one of the buildings. So the other thing that I found interesting in Dresden, so this was 2013 or 14. This was Volkswagen's first attempt at what's called a kind of an autonomous, a place where cars got built more or less automatically. But Volkswagen had embedded 60,000 magnets into the floor, so everything moved. And I wanted to see the factory, but unfortunately, the 2 days we were there, the factory was closed due to renovation or whatever they were doing, changing things over, so I couldn't see it. But you can see here this centerpiece to the building. It moves, and so when the cars are finished, the cars get put into these units, and it's more or less like a Tesla plant in the sense that everything is automated. The car that they were building at the time was called a Phaeton, Phaeton, and it was a high-end Volkswagen that never got imported into the U.S. market, and they don't build it anymore. But now this factory is building electric Golfs, Golf Volkswagens. So Volkswagen owns a lot of different car companies, and one of the car companies that it owns is Bugatti. They had a display of Bugattis. So Dresden, as you leave the town, also going up the river, the Elbe River a little bit, there are obviously lots of different castles along the way. This is called the Castle Alberbeck. It was built 1854 as a private residence for the Count Wilhelm family. And unfortunately, though, the family after the war had no more money left, and they ended up also having some gambling debts by one of their relatives, and they ended up selling it to the city of Dresden. Now Dresden owns it, and we went up there, and because they've now made it into a cafe. So you're up at the cafe looking down at the Elbe, and you can see the background. There's Dresden. And if you remember the flooding, there you can see how much room the city has given the river, because it takes over when it starts to flood. It floods, I mean, huge amounts of water. But this is a boat going by. So the little coffee shop they have out top at this castle is my wife. It's just typical European beauty. It's a coffee shop where you can have a cup of coffee and a piece of pastry that makes you feel like you're a king. But it's just another beautiful place to be able to hang out. And as most of the ladies know, Meissen, I wanted to go see the factory. So I wanted to go see the factory, but problem with Meissen is that the prices have usually minimum of 3 figures in it. And so my wife would look at it, but other than beautiful porcelain, it's something just to look at. But Meissen started in 1710, so it's a very old, one of the oldest European hard paste porcelain manufacturers. So one of the things my wife did find was the outlet to Meissen, which had some better pricing. And so we did find a few things to bring back home, but we did buy them at the outlet, not at the Meissen facility. So I'm going to just take a short pause. If anybody has any questions or any thoughts.
Yeah, I went to the Meissen factory, man, and I got a nice little plate there at the outlet too.
I'm sure Eric's wallet was squeaking at the time.
Yeah, no, I think he was shaking in his boots, but anyway, I got it, so I was quite pleased. Just a nice little plate.
You know, Barry, you've shown a lot of pictures of Berlin. That I'd been there twice. Once, like you, before the wall came down, which was very claustrophobic, I found. I wanted to get out of West Berlin as fast as I could. And right after the war, when you could buy Soviet paraphernalia, army paraphernalia at the Brandenburg Gate. And most of what I saw was a really, really ugly 1950s architecture, which was, hideous in comparison to some of the beautiful shots you've shown.
Well, one of the problems, Ray, was that after the war, everybody thought old was bad, right? And so the architecture of that time was the 50s, right? And so they thought what they were building was beautiful. It just, just downright not really that pleasant.
Yeah, I wished I had thought before. I would have invited my friend Detlef to join in this, because he was actually born in East Germany. Came out before the wall went down, but still, I think he might have some interesting perspectives on some of this history, particularly regarding Dresden.
Well, Dresden is one of those embarrassments for the world. It was one of those last minute things that they should have left alone. It's like going to bomb Florence, right? I mean, what are we doing here?
Well, it's the.
I'm not judging.
Yeah,
right?
No. It's the 20,000 civilians on a primarily non-military target that I think raises the most controversy.
Yeah. Anyway, for now, for us to look at, it's hard to imagine what they went through, but the beauty of the town is just off the Richter scale.
Yeah. We haven't been there.
A lot of memories from the old days there. I lived there for 2 years in Berlin, and things like that tower. You saw the radio tower. The Russians built that right in our traffic pattern, so that we couldn't make a normal approach into Berlin. And it brings back a lot of memories for sure.
I didn't know that, Jack. That's interesting.
Barry, Elsa and I, when we were in Dresden, we visited what they called the Green Vault. And the Green Vault was a beautiful building that apparently has the world's largest collection of jewels and emeralds. And in it, the place was absolutely fantastic. They had a large table that they called the Maharaja's birthday. And it's all done in gold with miniature figurines. And there was a gun, an actual little pistol about the size of my thumb that was actually working.
Yes.
You could, it was,
Fingernail, your thumb
I mean,
fingernail.
they were, and you see the Maharaja sitting in the center, and the world is bringing him presents, and they're all miniature, beautiful.
Animals
Anyway,
and elephants
yeah.
and everything, tigers, and it was absolutely out
Oh,
of this
absolutely
world.
gorgeous. Anyway,
And a lot of gems, not just gold, a lot of rubies and diamonds and emeralds in it. It was out of this world.
yep.
Yeah, I mean, the architecture, it's typical. I mean, European architecture is something that, you know, the world doesn't reproduce, but boy, it's spectacular, whether it's jewelry or
Yeah,
whatever.
I thought it was a beautiful city.
We
The
went to,
architecture, I think, in Berlin and Germany is beautiful, though, how they've built it all up again. That amazed me.
we went to Berlin. We had a family reunion up in northern Germany, and Steve was flying at the time, and he didn't know if he was going to get the time off or not. So Philip said he would come with me, but he wanted to see Berlin. And I'm thinking, oh, I don't know about traveling to Berlin by myself with my kids. But Philip picked it out, and he figured out where we're going to stay. And as we're landing in the airplane, I'm going, Philip, where are we staying? And he's going, oh, at this place. And I'm going, gulp, that's in East Germany. And I mean, East Berlin. And he's going, oh, Mom, it's fine, it's fine. And we get there, we drive there, and the place that we were staying, all of the stuff around, everything is graffiti. All the walls and everything, the bottom of everything that you could reach from the street is all graffiti. And I'm going, oh my gosh. And we get in, and it's like a courtyard and this really nice hotel inside, but the outside, the walls are all graffiti. And then we walked out at night to go to a restaurant, and it's all like family pizza and just really nice. And we enjoyed it. But that was my son's tour for his mom.
Trudy, what year was that?
You know, I can't remember, but Philip was still in college, so it must have been like, I'm guessing like 20 years ago or so, 25 years. Something like that.
So the wall was down though.
Yeah, the wall was down. But
Yeah.
one of the things Philip did was he took a bicycle tour that he went around, that they took him around the wall, you know, and stuff. While I took a bus tour back to the some palace. There was some palace or something. But I'll have to look up what the year it was. I have no idea.
I was there in 1963 and I was on a college tour, and we went through Checkpoint Charlie, and it was scary. You know, we weren't sure if we were going to be really allowed through, and there were some new buildings, but the story we got was that the West was building all these beautiful new modern buildings to show the East Germans how much better West Germany was, and just sort of point out the contrast between what they were living with and what we had on the other side. But those pictures that, Barry, you showed one of 1961 of Checkpoint Charlie, and I don't remember it being quite that bad with that many tanks, but there was a lot of barbed wire and a lot of military stuff, and it was a little scary going through.
Yep.
Those pictures are just great.
Thank you. Well, let me continue on. We're now leaving Dresden, and this is a church that I made a notation to everybody saying you won't believe this, because I'll give you a little story. This is a town called Kutna Hora, Kutnahora, and it's before you go into Prague. I think it's about 60 or 70 miles north of Prague. And this area, Kutna Hora, was one of the famous areas where silver was originally found, and it was the third largest producer of silver in Europe at the time. But Kutna Hora, what the church is known for, it's a relatively small church, and obviously in the 13th and 14th century, people were buried inside of the church walls because there was a wall around the church and people were buried inside. Well, along comes the 14th, I think it was 1470s or whatever it was, the Black Plague. And that area had about 40,000 people that died of the Black Plague, which is our current pandemic, but not quite that bad, but they had a way worse one. And so everybody wanted to be buried inside of the church grounds. So it ended up that the church grounds obviously didn't have enough space to put 40,000 people in. So the people were buried all around the church. About the 1700s, all of a sudden a monk decided that he wanted to bring all of the souls from outside of the church grounds inside the church grounds. So what the man ended up doing is something that is just hard to believe, but the inside of this church, he took all of the heads and the femurs and all of the body parts that he dug up, and he made decorations out of them. And so what you end up having is the inside of this church is something that it's hard to comprehend. But in the 1700s, this monk decided that he was going to put some artistry to what he was doing, because he didn't want to collect all of just the heads. And he made the inside of the church into this unbelievable piece. I mean, this looks like the killing fields of Cambodia, where they stack the heads, but this guy in his artistry wanted to bring all the souls inside of the church. So underneath the church, this was just absolutely stock-a-block full of body parts to bring all of the souls back into the church.
Oh, that's one sick puppy.
Creepy.
Well, I mean, so obviously, this is not the first time anybody's touched that head, but
it's polished.
But it was, artistically, it's very interesting. It's something very morbid, but it's part of history. So you look at it and you go, okay, that's just wild. So
Barry, I think in Madagascar, the relatives pull out the death of the people from the wherever they bury them every year, and they have some special ceremony. So there's a lot of places where they do these kind of things to dead bodies.
Yeah. Well, he had an artistic flair. At least he made it look somewhat interesting. So anyway, that's the end of these pictures of the gruesome church. But it was one of those things my brain couldn't, I had a hard time wrapping itself around this craziness.
What was the church called again, Barry?
The town is called Kutna Hora, Kutna Hora, Kutna Hora. It's actually in the Czech area, which used to be Czechoslovakia, which is now the Czech Republic. And it was a communist obviously communist for the longest time. So I guess nobody wanted to touch his artwork even during that time period. So we're now going to go to Prague. Prague is, again, one of those cities on a river, and this is called the Latva River, and it's the Latva runs into the Elbe, and the Elbe, as you saw before in Dresden, runs all the way to the North Sea. So the middle of town there, where it says Stare Mesto, that area right there is what's called the Old Town area. And that's kind of what I focused on right now. So you can see I'm in the Old Town area looking across the river. And the town of Prague is another one of those, you just shake your head how beautiful it is. The old section is what you're going to see some of it, and we went up to the top where the current power structure is, where Václav Havel, if you remember his name, was when he had the revolution. Anyway, where the current power is. But this is the river that separates Prague. There's also a bridge there. You can kind of see it. And this is called the Charles Bridge. It's a very, very famous bridge. It goes back to 1350. And it was built across the river, and it was the only way to get across the river at that time. But it's still in use, and not for cars anymore. It's only for pedestrians. And one of the things to note down here below the river, you can see that looks like there were like ramps. Okay, what happened on this river has happened many times, is that during the winter time, they would have a lot of wood that would flood, and they would go down the river, and it would clog the Charles Bridge. And so you can see here, this was the flood of 1872, and so it basically clogged up the river. So the Czechs, you can, going back to that, put these structures in so that it no longer can clog the river, that it allows water to flow, because it could bring the river down. I mean, bring the bridge down. So the Charles Bridge, like I said, was was complete. It took 45 years to complete, but this is the other side of it looking back. There's my friends Gary and Karen. We're walking across the Charles Bridge. It's just open to the public, and I mean, it's open to walking only. That building right there in the background is what's called the Powder Tower. And in the 17th century, it was used to store gunpowder. Obviously, that's why it's called the Powder Tower. It's, again, just a beautiful city, lots of cafes everywhere. One of the interesting things, there's a main square in town, and this is the Church of Our Lady, and it's a Gothic church. And they always say that Walt Disney, when he visited in Prague many, many years ago in the 50s, this was his inspiration for Fantasyland. Because if you look at the tops of this building with all of the gold and pieces off of it, and then you look at Fantasyland and Disneyland, there's so much similarity to it. So the other famous piece, this square here, is where everybody goes to when they go to Prague, and it's just chock-a-block full with people, but there is a clock there. And the clock is a famous astronomical clock that was first installed in 1410, and it's the oldest clock still operating. It did suffer damage in 1945 during what was called the Prague Uprising, but it is back in excellent shape and still functioning. It's like I said, a very, very old clock. But when you go to Prague, you always have to go see the clock. But the negative is, see the crowds all waiting for the clock. So you don't want to be around when the 12 strikes. So as you go up into the hills, you start to see where the current power structure is. And one of the things I liked was the birds. And here was a bunch of peacocks, and this is your typical peacock. But I saw something I'd never seen before, and that was a white peacock. So inside of the government grounds, my friend Gary and I saw this white peacock and going, wow, what's this? Well, we turned, and the peacock all of a sudden opened up. And something I'd never seen before. First of all, a white peacock, but then a white peacock with his plumes open. It was just beautiful. Obviously, in Prague, you got to eat something. We ended up going into this very old brewery. And so what a lot of people I don't know are familiar with, but Budweiser beer, it originally started here in Prague. And the name originally was Budvar, B-U-D-V-A-R, Budweiser. And it dates back to the 1802 when they started shipping it to the United States in 1875. But unfortunately, by 1948, all the Czech breweries were nationalized by the communist government. So this brewery became property of the state. But Budweiser beer has its roots here in Prague, inside of this building and inside of this place where we had lunch. So we left Prague because I can spend an hour just on Prague, but we left Prague and we're heading south. This is a little Airbnb because it was my typical traveling. I would go to my Airbnb app. Where can I stay? What it'll look like? Well, this was our Airbnb, and just a great place. Another beautiful estate. And this was in a town called Brno. So from Brno, we ended up driving south towards, or actually east, more east, towards the Alps. And this was again one of our Airbnbs we stayed in. This is in a town called Berchtesgaden, which is in Germany again. And Berchtesgaden is again one of the more beautiful areas of the world. So our Airbnb, this is where we stayed. Again, typical German European beds, not separated, in feather beds, the size of those pillows. Our Airbnb where we stayed, that was the view off the front of it, looking down into the valley. So in Berchtesgaden, there is a river that flows out of a lake, and the river is called the Koenigsegg River, and it flows outside, and you can see the green color because it comes from the glaciers. So there is a lake called the Koenigsegg Lake, and what it translates into is the King's Lake. It's an all-natural lake, and it's the third deepest in Germany. The lake is noted for its clear water. Since 1909, the only way you're able to get on this lake is either by a pedal boat or a rowing boat. And now with the advent of electric boats, quite a few years back, they now allow electric boats on it. But the lake is one of the more beautiful lakes that you'll ever visit. And this is the southern part of it. So you can jump on a little ferry that takes you in these beautiful little wooden boats up the lake. And so as you go up, you can see why, where all the water came from, because it's surrounded by the Alps. There is a little town about halfway up that we stopped at. You're going to see it a little bit, but you can see the beauty of it. I mean, it's just spectacular. Anyway, just a beautiful, beautiful lake. So halfway up, there is a church. It's a Roman Catholic church called Saint Bartholomew. It was a chapel originally built in 1134, right? And in 1697, it was rebuilt as a Baroque style church, but it's, why they would build it halfway up this lake with no roads to it. I mean, to bring all this stuff up was just spectacular. But it's one of those little places that you stop along the going up the lake. So there's our boat that we came in on, the same little electric boats that they drop you off. So after they dropped us off, we walked around. This was an old hunting lodge, which was originally, this is not the original structure, but it was originally on this same place from the 12th century, but it's been rebuilt quite a few times. But you can see for a hunting lodge how beautiful this must have been. The building itself, you can see the wooden gutters, which is hard to believe that somebody would take the time to make wooden gutters. They wouldn't last that long, but that's a roof. So as we're heading up the lake farther, it only goes to a dead end, but it dead ends right into the Alps. So we're now right near the tail end of the Koenigsegg, and you can see how clear the water is, how spectacularly beautiful, but that is the tail end of the lake. There is a little house back there. I don't know if anybody owns it, or maybe the state owns it, I don't know, but anyway, it's just a spectacularly beautiful setting. But here's the setting at the tail end of the lake. That little building, the waterfall, the Alps. I mean, it doesn't get any better than this, right? So one of the things that you'll see in a few minutes is this area of Berchtesgaden. It was also what was Hitler's playground, his summer place. So you can see it was just a spectacularly beautiful place. So right next to Berchtesgaden, there is also what they call these bonds or ski lifts in the wintertime, obviously. But because the ski lifts are, as you go up the mountain, you start out at the bottom and you can see a little bit of snow, but as you go up, you can start to see that gets you to the top of the mountain, which is looking across the Alps, which is just, it's just staggeringly beautiful. But you can see there's lots of snow up there because we're there in the summertime. So from the top there, you look across, and that there is Hitler's what's called Eagle's Nest, and that was outside of Berchtesgaden, where he would go with Eva Braun and, you know, different things. Anyway, that was what the Allies had tried to bomb for a long time, and were having a hard time because you can imagine the valley it was in. It was not easy to drop precision bombs in 1945, but it was right across from where we were. So typical German, Austrian, you know, structure. I mean, water not just coming out of a spigot, but we make it out of a tree and allow the water to go into tree. I mean, everything is always made beautiful. This was our Airbnb we stayed in, or pension. This is in a town called Meyerhofen, which I'm sure Eric and Ray, of you guys have heard, because it's right in the middle of the Dolomitan area. So the mountain itself, we ended up a second ago going up to the top on these ski lifts, but you can see the majority of it is just, it's very small little towns that you go up into. This is again a little town called Yoonsburg. We're looking at it from as we're going up this Bahn again, another one called the Hintertucher, and we ended up going up to where the red pointer is, where we'll end up in a second. But in the summertime, it's no problem. In the wintertime, it would be a wonderful place to go skiing. So again, going up to the top of this, you can see in the background, you can see the little town at the bottom, but you know, it's just spectacular up there. You can see people skiing down there in the summertime because they're skiing on glaciers. You ski all year round. The ladies here not skiing, but walking in the snow. I always said, two snow bunnies. There's the gondolas coming up. And so where we were a second ago, there's another level further up. And so we took the gondola further up because there you can see in the background some of the ski areas. And the next higher area is now at the top of the mountain. And how they ever built this is beyond me. But you can see in the side of the mountain, they've got these gondolas running over to the high point. And up at the top, you're literally at the top, almost at the top of the Alps, looking across. I mean, we ended up catching it a beautiful day at the Alps. So after you get out of the snow, we ended up, one of the things I always like doing, there's a town in Germany called Baden-Baden. And it's one of my favorite places to go before we head home. And Baden-Baden has, for me, one of the most unbelievable thermal baths that have ever been produced. And it was, this one here is called Friedrichsbad, and it was built in 1869. And the reason they built it there, obviously, is because there was lots of geothermal hot water coming out of the ground. But it's been in existence and used since the days of the Romans. So I wasn't able to get a lot of shots inside, but this is the inside as you're going up the stairs. There are 17 steps. As you go in here, you go into different rooms and different areas, and the rooms are all set up in different baths, in different pools at different temperatures. So there's a 17-step process. It's an all-day process you go through. Nudity is mandatory, but you start out nude with a linen wrap. and they start you off in this high quality linen that is heated, and they wrap your body in it. And as you go from area to area, these are taken off the internet, but this is what it looks like inside. They have all of these different baths that you go into at different temperatures, and then you get massages along the way. And I mean, it's an out of this world experience. Because it's one of those places, the old European money has always gone to Baden-Baden. Originally, Baden-Baden, the town of Baden-Baden, was the casino capital. I mean, it was the Las Vegas capital of that area. But it's now primarily for people who retire in Baden-Baden because of the baths, because of the warm water, because obviously in Europe it gets very cold in the wintertime. So they daily like to get into these baths, and you know, you lounge around. The very final thing I'll have to say about this baths is that the 17th step is my favorite. They put you into this round room that's probably 100 feet in diameter with a huge ceiling, and there is a bed. So the person wraps you again up in a brand new piece of linen, a warm linen piece, lays you onto the bed, then wraps you with puts another piece of linen on top of that, a warm piece of linen, and then they leave the room. And there are about 30 beds in this room, and you stay in that cocoon state for as long as you want. And after all the baths and the treatments and all the things you've got done, you turn into this jelly. Anyway, it's hard to imagine how the feeling, but that's the last thing I'll say about this place. This is just a couple of pictures of the original baths that were underneath it, because the Romans used this, and this is a 2,000-year-old Roman bath underneath Friedrichsbad, and because there was so much geothermal so much hot water coming to the earth that they have been using it for 2,000 years, because you can imagine those days to have a warm bath as a general, a Roman general, this would have been heaven. So anyway, these are just the different rooms, and primarily they had the warm water go underneath and around the walls, not inside necessarily, because they used the heat of the walls to heat them up. So it was a dry heat that they used. So this is Baden-Baden, always a great place to kind of end up. As we're leaving, heading further north, this is a side thing. We stopped at the Porsche Museum. This is the new one. There was an old one that they just redid, but this one is the new Porsche Museum in Stuttgart. Good old Ferdinand Porsche, one of his original designs. The old 356 Roadster, which is obviously the classic. This was one that I would have liked, but it wasn't in my pocketbook at the time. So I was hoping Sabina would be on this call. So we ended up at my cousin's house, and this is my cousin Sabina, who's been on the call a couple of different times. And she told us to hang out with her for a couple of days, which we did. Her husband, who made us some pizza, and he's making pizza dough here. So they have an outside pizza oven. So he made us this wonderful pizza for dinner. And here he is serving it. And his daughter there, we're not quite sure what, her name is Amelia, what she was thinking, but she was obviously not happy. But it was just a very nice way to end our vacation. And that's more or less the end of the presentation.
Yeah.
Wow.
Very nice.
Very good.
Yeah, it's amazing, amazing.
Yeah, really, really good.
Thank you, Barry. That was fantastic.
Thank you.
I love the architecture and the history and all that. It's amazing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Beautiful scenery. Wow.
Richard and Rita here. Thanks very much. We enjoyed that.
Richard, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Thanks, Barry.
Yeah, Europe is one of those special places.
Sounds on, so just wait.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thanks, Barry.
Guys, see you later. Jack, nice to bring your guest along. I don't know his name, but
Yes, his name's Chuck, and he flew he's a Pan Am pilot, and he flew the Berlin airlift.
Really?
Yeah, and that's why if that tower got up, they had to fly around the tower.
They put it up deliberately in our approach path, so we got to go around it.
That's interesting. I didn't know
I lived
that.
in Berlin for 2 years, so.
What?
Really,
So you probably recognized a lot of those buildings.
oh, yeah, I really appreciate that. Thank you.
Thanks.
And Berlin is one of those special places. You know, these towns, after a while, I get lost in them because it's just, you spend so much time in the history of it. And each one has so much to offer, whether you're in the Prague or wherever, you know, it's just, there's not enough time in life to enjoy all this stuff.
No kidding.
Thanks.
That
Was your
really good,
childhood
Barry.
in Berlin, Barry, or was another town?
Say again?
Were your first years when you were in Germany?
No, I was from southern Germany near Stuttgart. There's a real small town near there. And so no, Berlin is not, I mean, it was always a place I wanted. It's like I can show pictures of endless amounts of European stuff, but Berlin is one of those special places everybody can relate to.
Right. Just spectacular pictures. Thank you.
Oh, my pleasure. My pleasure. I just want to go again.
Yeah,
I do too.
And I see it all. I'd love to go back again. I loved it there.
I'd love to.
Yeah, that was great, Barry.
Thank you.
Yeah, it was great the way you worked in some of the historical photographs interspersed with the modern or newer photographs.
Thanks again, Barry.
My pleasure. My pleasure, guys. My pleasure.
Thank you.
Great job. Sure appreciate the effort.
Jim, I appreciate it. Hello, Christy. Nice to see you.
I got in on the end of it.
I recorded it, so you can watch it again later on. I'll send it out.
Okay, great.
I told her it was well worth it. She loves Germany and she's got German blood, so that was great for her.
Well, the entrance fee is the correct price, so that's the main thing.
Okay, so long, guys. We'll see
Joe,
you.
look forward to your Iceland trip, by the way.
Okay, it's coming.
Yeah.
Wendy,
When's the next one?
Wendy.
Oh,
I'm
Wendy's
doing the
the
next
next
one.
week.
Yeah.
Oh, good for you, Wendy.
Hey, dress up in the local gear, the bamboo and all that stuff.
I was just thinking of bring along a kwacha, which is their money, because it's going to fill the whole screen. Huge money, and it's not worth very much. Boy, when we went to the bank with $50 US, we were there all day trying to get it, and we came out with, honestly, we had not enough places to pad our bodies with all this cash. It was unbelievable. And they didn't even count it to you. They just handed you a stack of money and said goodbye. So we didn't even know if we got what we asked for.
Well, Wendy, it could have been worse if it had been coins.
Oh gosh, yeah, we would have been jingling. We would have been robbed so many times. Oh my goodness.
Yeah.
Anyway,
Oh, well.
it'll be fun. I'll get it together. And if you'd like to just confer about that, Barry, on Sunday, I'm fine with that. Same time as before, like 5 o'clock your time.
Yep. I'll send me an email when you want to do it, and
Okay.
It shouldn't be a problem.
Okay, sure. That sounds good.
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right, everybody, it's late now.
Okay, look forward to next week then.
Yeah, you bet.
See you tomorrow, Barry.
Okay.
Bye,
See you on the
people.
hike.
Bye, everyone.
Have a good hike, gentlemen. Bye.
Jim, I'll see you Friday.
Okay.
Anyway, Elspeth, take care. Trudy, nice to tell Steve hello.